Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a este espacio de entrevistas y ahora qué hacemos, en donde estamos hablando con los expositores de Congreso Futuro 2024. Junto a mí se encuentra el profesor Edward Spang. Para comentarles más de él, durante más de 15 años, el doctor Spang ha investigado para comprender y mejorar los sistemas vinculados de alimentos, energías y recursos hídricos. Ha aplicado en este enfoque a través de temas tan diversos como el procesamiento del café, la carne cultivada, los residuos alimentarios, las microcervecerías y la conservación del agua residencial. Además, el Dr. Spang desempeña muchas otras funciones, como educador, investigador y líder activo de la comunidad, todas ellas guiadas por el principio de que todo el mundo debe tener acceso a alimentos suficientes y nutritivos dentro de un sistema alimentario sostenible desde el punto de vista medioambiental. Como director del Instituto Robert Mondavi, pone en contacto a profesores y estudiantes con una amplia red de científicos, empresarios, políticos responsables, consumidores y profesionales de los sectores alimentarios, vitivinícola y cervecero. También es asesor docente de la Food Loss and Waste Collaborative, un programa de investigación interdisciplinar del campus centrado en el desarrollo de soluciones y enfoques innovadores para reducir la pérdida y el desperdicio de los alimentos a lo largo de todo su ciclo de vida. Professor Edward, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being here in Congreso Futuro 2024.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been an incredible experience to participate in the Congress.
Wonderful. I hear and I read that you are an environment science and policy expert. Can you describe us what is that career and exactly what are you doing as a professional?
For sure. When I say I'm an environmental science and policy expert, what I'm trying to understand is humanity's impact on the environment. What actions we take, whether we're using water or we're producing energy or making products, food products included, all of these activities have an environmental impact. So what I seek to do is measure what that impact is, look at potential alternatives, and then see if there might be some policy solutions to help change the system to have less of an environmental impact.
Wonderful. And how your research interconnects all these elements that you mentioned, food, energy, and water systems?
Well, I find it really interesting to think about where resource systems are connected. So, for example, for my dissertation research, which was a while ago, I looked at energy production around the world. And instead of thinking of energy production just in terms of carbon emissions, I was thinking about energy production in terms of water consumption. And it's the same thing when I look at food systems. A lot of energy and water is used to produce the food we eat. So if we end up throwing food away that we don't eat or it's not consumed, all of that water, all of that energy, even the land and pesticides is not going to a productive use.
Wow, impressive, Professor. But how your investigation is crucial for sustainability?
It's really important to know, we have a saying that says you can't manage what you can't measure. And so we really have to understand what is going on so that we can pick the best solution forward. And that solution, when I say it's the best solution, it has to make sense economically, it has to make sense socially, as well as environmentally. So we have to do a lot of thinking and measurement to try to think about what does the situation look like now, what do we want it to look like, and how do we get there?
You mentioned that you have a lot of experience, a lot of time ago, you mentioned actually. And during that time, I understand that you accumulate a lot of experience in diverse topics like coffee processing and culture meat. But what are the main challenges you have identified in achieving a sustainable food system?
Oh, that's a big question. And yes, I've looked at a lot of different food products, and it's really interesting to take a deep dive, meaning really understanding at a high level how particular products are made. You can learn a lot about those products, and usually you can identify parts of the production system where you could reduce water use or reduce greenhouse gas use. So almost any system I've looked at, I have been able to identify some opportunities to make that particular product with less of an environmental impact. Again, the solution has to make sense economically as well. But for sustainable food systems, we have to consider the food not just being an amount of food, but healthy food and easily accessible to everybody. And so those are two bigger challenges. I don't necessarily work in those areas as much as want to identify where there might be problems there. So it takes participation and coordination between multiple experts to really make changes towards a broadly more sustainable food system.
You mentioned that this new system of production of food has to have an economic sense. I hearing that it comes to my mind that it should be not only to the big companies that they may have to make sense to this food production, but also the consumers. Do you have any knowledge or any experience related to how to the price of the food is related to the acquisition of the food for different people in society?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's not as much by expertise, but a lot of my colleagues at UC Davis are agriculture and resource economists, and they work on pricing issues all the time. However, I do look sometimes at emerging products like cultured meat, and we'll do what's called a techno-economic assessment.
Okay.
Meaning, can the producer, based on what we know on how this is made, can they create this product at a price point that's accessible in the marketplace? So we do ask some of those questions.
Wonderful. Professor, now you already had your presentation in Congreso Futuro, and you talk about a lot of what you mentioned right now in your interview. But I would like to ask you, to the people that watch your presentation, what would you like to be the main idea that they keep in their mind?
Well, I think there's two things I want them to know. I want them to understand the scale of the problem of food loss and waste. Okay. I think it's a major problem that 1/3 of all the food we produce on the planet is lost or wasted. We can certainly do better than that. We should have a more efficient food system. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done by food companies, food producers, food retailers. But the nice part about this challenge is we can all participate. We've all experienced throwing out food in our home, sometimes buying too much or making too much or letting it spoil in our refrigerator. So there's opportunities for all of us to contribute to this particular issue. So I do hope that is one of the takeaways, that everyone here can go home and save some food at home.
And you mentioned a second one, or?
Sorry?
Did you mention a second one, or?
It was one, how big the problem is, and two, that everyone can participate.
Oh,
yes,
wonderful.
Thank you.
You mentioned right now the different kinds of industry, but also I would like to think about the public policy related to the control of wasting food.
Sure.
Do you have any experience of knowledge related to that? How to a recommendation from your area of expertise to public policymakers? Something that you should say, oh, this is a great point, great concept that you should manage to understand really correctly to create public policies?
Sure. So in California right now, we have a very aggressive policy to address food loss and waste. The goal is to divert 75% of the organic waste that currently goes from landfill to compost and anaerobic digestion. The overall goal of that policy is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. When food waste goes into the landfill, it creates methane, which is a terrible greenhouse gas. So we want to avoid that potential solution. What's interesting about the California policy is it also includes a piece that that tries to capture edible food from the food system and redirect that to charitable food system or donations. So it's two pieces. One, keep the food waste out of the landfill, and two, if the food's edible, make sure that we give it to people who need it.
How can you guarantee that the food is important to keep the most of the food and avoid to get to waste? How to guarantee to the public that food is actually edible?
Oh, that's a very good point. And we get that question a lot sometimes when we talk about food loss and waste. But it's using the same distribution system often that we currently use for food. So we can use refrigerated trucks and refrigeration to make sure that the food is at a food safe temperature from point A to point B. So we would leverage the existing food supply chain, the existing charitable food system that knows how to ensure food safety. Policy can also assist in this endeavor. We have policies in the United States that make it so if you're donating food to someone and there was the chance that they got sick, the person who donated it is not liable for being in trouble for that. Okay. So we have some laws that try to protect people to give them the opportunity to donate without feeling they're taking a very large risk.
We were talking a lot about food, but right now in my mind, there's different types and categories of food. When we talk about avoiding to get waste on food and reintegrated in this circular economy and into the consumers. What types of food are good to this kind of new industry, new system, and what aren't try to avoid?
Sure.
Which ones?
So there are certain types of food that are easier to deliver to a different market or to the charitable food system. Certainly anything that's shelf stable is shelf stable in the primary market and the secondary market. But things like produce, you know, a grower or a farmer, let's say they're harvesting all their perfect large apples to sell at a grocery store. If they have some smaller apples or apples that aren't the right color, they can, like I said before, they can use the same food supply chain to deliver that to a different location. Another solution that I find really interesting that's emerging in the United States is a topic called upcycling. So this can be taking food byproducts from food processing.
Okay.
For example, think about when you make juice. You squeeze the juice out of the fruit and you have the glass of juice, but you also have all the fiber that's left over. There are companies in the United States right now that are taking that fiber and putting it into new products.
Wow.
Tortilla chips, crackers, all sorts of different ideas. And that's an exciting area of innovation because it's taking something that could go bad and making it shelf stable and actually a new and exciting food product.
Impressive. We are talking about a lot of different kinds of professions, economies, probably bioengineering, but how can do you have experience working with a lot of different kinds of professionals in this area? How is it to work with different experts in different areas?
Yes, that's a great question, and it's one of my favorite things about working on food loss and waste is I can't do it alone. And I don't want to do it alone. I'm pretty social, so I really like to work with my colleagues on this particular topic. And at the University of California, Davis, where I teach, we are very used to collaboration across disciplines. And so not only is that necessary, but I find it very rewarding and really fun to work with others around a shared interest or a common problem.
Impressive, Professor. Continuando con la entrevista con el profesor Edward Spang, vamos a una breve pausa y posteriormente continuamos con la tanda de preguntas aquí en Congreso Futuro 2024. Hola, estamos de vuelta aquí en la entrevista con el profesor Edward Spang, hablando acerca del manejo de residuos orgánicos y alimentos que se desperdician. Professor Spang, I have a question related more to your expertise and career. How can someone turn into an environment science and policy expert?
Well, you have to come to University of California, Davis, of course. No, it's a common field of study in many, many universities. And I believe there are more students in the younger generation that are really interested in these big societal problems. So it is an exciting field of study. And really what you're learning how to do is think about resources as systems. You know, they're systems that are connected to each other. They're connected to our actions in society. They're connected to natural cycles in the biological world. So I find it very fascinating. Of course, I'm biased, but it is an exciting area to study, and you'll have all the tools to really understand, and it's more and more important as we have environmental challenges in our society, to be able to come up with solutions and to design good policies.
You have mentioned sometimes California.
Yes.
And including Chile, both of those parts of the world are really well known because of their wines. Have you experienced working with wineries? And if that's true, what can you tell us about that industry?
Yes, so I have a number of colleagues that work in wine at UC Davis that are real experts. But I actually do interface a little bit with the wine industry because there's waste, of course, in the wine industry. When we make wine, we have the grapes and seeds and stems left over that you can actually extract compounds from. So there are some colleagues of mine on campus are extracting valuable compounds from the leftover grapes after winemaking. One example are anthocyanins. It's an antioxidant. It's good for your health, but it can also be used as a dye or to color, fabrics or food. So there's I think what's exciting is that when we look at some of these material flows, what we thought had very little value, if we're creative, we can find treasure inside of these waste streams.
And that's where it came. It helped the interdisciplinary. I assume that you need, for example, biochemistries or bioengineers making analysis of these waste.
Yes.
Exactly. Professor, another question, more related to more local problems and adoption of sustainable practices. From your perspective, what is needed to encourage a broader adoption of sustainable practices in agriculture and food production?
That's a great question, and I think something I mentioned in my talk is that our food systems in many ways work well for what they're designed for. And what they've been designed for is to develop safe, quality, and consistent food in the marketplace. We do a really good job of that. But our food supply system was not designed to minimize waste. And so we need to start thinking about how we achieve those same qualities we want before of safety and quality and consistency while also minimizing waste at the same time. There is value there in terms of potentially saving resources, which costs money, but there's also the environmental impact, which policy can really help drive value to. So if we make it, you can have a tariff on someone if they're emitting too many greenhouse gases. That might help them look for solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their food production. So policy can play a role in sort of nudging people towards the decisions or the system that we want to see in the future.
Understand. And in your experience, do you know cases of success trying to create and adopting sustainable process, thinking about local governments or some institutions?
Well, I gave the example of California before, so maybe I'll switch and give an interesting example from industry.
Okay.
There's, whenever we make beer, just like wine, we have the leftover barley, which we generally will use as animal feed, which is a good destination for this material. But there are companies now in the United States that are seeking to take this grain and put it back into the food supply chain. Now, what's interesting about this is what happens when you make beer, the yeast ferments the sugar in the grains. So you're taking the sugar out of the grains. What you're left with is both fiber and protein, two really important ingredients we need to have in our diets. So we were perhaps throwing away the most nutritional aspect in the beer making process to make the beer. So I think that's a really important opportunity to actually take they're called spent grains, make them into a flour that we can put into other products. But Anheuser-Busch, one of our largest breweries in the country, has now invested in extracting the protein from spent grains, and that makes a difference at a huge scale when it's a company that big.
Right now, because we are in an event called Future Congress, I would like to ask you about what will be the worst case scenario for humanity looking at the future related to the waste management?
For me, I get nervous about climate change affecting the productivity of our food system and us not moving quickly enough to reduce waste in our food system. What that would really turn out would be a more unequal food system with more people experiencing food insecurity. That is the future I don't want to see. I want to make sure that everyone has adequate access to food and we're not putting too much of a burden on the environment while we feed everybody.
And technically that will be a maximization because of the climate change. But right now we have actually inequality in the food production, right?
For sure.
Wow, impressive. And in the more hopeful view of the future, what do you think is the best case scenario for humanity?
Well, I'd like to see us produce healthy and nutritious food that's accessible to all, and accessible in terms of being geographically close, being able to go get the food, but also being able to afford it. I also see us making a lot of progress on reducing food loss and waste so that we're not throwing away such valuable, important material from our economic system.
Do you know some new kinds of science or technologies that should we be looking at to avoid this kind of bad case scenarios that you can recommend us to look at?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting technologies out there. There's fascinating technologies to reduce carbon emissions. There's interesting technologies that can reduce water use on farms, and we need everything. We need all the technologies to work together to reduce the impact of our food system on the environment. What I really like about food loss and waste, and again, this is my topic, so I'm going to come back to it, is that just by reducing food loss and waste, we do secure those multiple benefits: reduced carbon emissions, reduced water use, reduced expenditures on our own food. So there's really, it's one of those rare scenarios where it's a win-win-win solution. So I think that is one of the really important pathways to get us to the future that we're looking for in our food system.
What steps do you believe are essential to achieve that vision that you said?
Well, we need to have policy work in a complementary way with industry, so that the policy is setting reasonable targets that aren't too expensive to meet, but they're also pushing industry to change so that they're addressing this issue in a meaningful way. I also think there's a really important role for talking about food loss and waste in our primary schools and public schools, because kids really understand this kind of thing. If you start to appreciate all the effort of the farmer and the companies that are producing and processing our food, even if it didn't cost much to you, you don't want to throw it away. You feel like you're throwing away all that hard work as well. And kids understand this kind of thing, and I think they can bring that idea home, teach their parents, and that can lead to a lot of change in households and the residential sector.
Wow, so not only we have to make a broad change in the whole system in the world, but also changes in how personally we saw all the food waste problem right now.
We all have a personal role to play, and I think education's an important component, and that's why I was, again, so grateful to be invited to the Congreso Futuro to talk about this, because I get to share the idea and spread the idea to others.
Because we're talking about education, you're an educator related to this area, right? How do you address the topic of sustainability in food, energy, and water resources with your students?
Well, I have the good fortune of teaching a class called Food Systems and Sustainability at University of California, Davis.
Okay.
And we talk about all these issues. So we get to talk about water use in food systems, energy use in food systems, how to measure the relationship of resource use between systems. We talk about food loss and waste management, all of these topics. So it's really exciting to be able to teach a class to students that is really the focus of my whole research career. The best part is we get students from all over campus. It's not just food science students, but we have environmental science, policy and management, animal science, people from all different backgrounds who are interested in this topic. So what that says to me, it gives me hope for the future that the younger students, the younger generation are really interested in these issues.
A question as a student in a university here in Chile.
Yeah.
How can you measure this kind of loss and disposal of food?
Well, there's lots of different ways to measure it. What's interesting to me is we've even done some work on our own campus to measure food loss and waste.
Wow.
So you can go to the cafeteria and see with different meals that are served how much food has been left on the plate when you turn it back in to have the dishes washed. We've done that kind of work. So you can measure things right in campus. You can measure your own food loss and waste at home. But what we need at the larger scale is working with the companies, working with many of the growers to measure food along the whole food supply chain.
And how long have you been doing this course in the university? And have you seen some changes in how your students interact with this problematic?
Yeah, a little bit. I think, I've been teaching it for 12 years. I think the good news is that every year my class gets a little bigger. So that there must be some good news about how we're teaching the class. So that I take a lot of heart in that. But also we're reaching, as I said before, different students. So students of economics are coming into the class. And that's exactly what we need. We need people who are going to go out into different sectors of government, different sectors of industry, and have some of these concepts in mind so that they can work together to develop some of the solutions.
Asking you more in the access to nutritious foods.
Yeah.
I have here that you mentioned that everyone should have access to sufficient and nutritious food within an environmental sustainable food system.
Yes.
Can you explain us that?
Yes, I mean, this is a big challenge, right? I mean, this is broader than my expertise, which is how our inequality in our economic systems. But what I can talk about is I'm also a member of a food bank, which delivers, donated food to food insecure. And actually the county I live in California is one of the most food insecure counties in California. So again, we can think of the big issue of food inequality, but we all have the ability to make an impact in our own communities by help facilitating that transfer of surplus food or donated food to people who really need it. And that's really important there to also make sure it's nutritious food. Because what's sometimes easier is the shelf-stable food, but what people need for nutrition is also fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables and meats and dairy to have a well-balanced diet. So food banks and the charitable food system have an important role to play to help people who are currently feeling left behind by the food system.
Professor, I have one last question
Okay.
to finish this interview, and it is related, and we will be doing it to all the guest speakers here
Sure.
that have been sitting here. What is your possible future?
Hopefully to return to Congreso Futuro. No. No. I really am excited by the work I'm currently doing, and I feel honored to be able to talk with different groups around the world about this topic. So I certainly look forward to reaching out to more people on the topic. I also really love being a university professor because every year I get to talk with a group of new students about this topic. And what's incredible to me is over time I start to see my students out in the field working on this issue, whether they're in a company or whether they're in the government, bringing some of the ideas that we've discussed at the university into action out in the world. That's the most satisfying outcome of being a professor, and it really inspires me to continue the work moving forward.
What a wonderful view and perspective of
Thanks.
your work. Professor Edward Spang, thank you so much for your time and for being here with us in Congreso Futuro 2024.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Muchas gracias al profesor Edward Spang por su tiempo y por esta entrevista con nosotros. Y los dejo invitados para que sigan viendo todos los eventos y todas las actividades que está desarrollando Congreso Futuro 2024 aquí en el SEINA en Santiago Centro. Que estén muy bien. Buenas tardes.